Hi everyone, guys.
I discovered my wife was cheating, so I created Quest for her, with divorce papers waiting at the end instead of a gift. They say it's always the small things, the subtle cracks that you never notice until everything falls apart. That night, it wasn't some big explosive moment that tore my life apart. No, it was just a careless remark, a drunken slip of the tongue that turned my world upside down. It was supposed to be a good night, just your typical party with old friends, beer flowing, laughter echoing through the room. Emily was in her element, mingling effortlessly with everyone, flashing that perfect smile of hers. She always knew how to light up a room, and I used to take pride in that. We'd been together for 7 years, married for 5, and I thought we had it all. The kind of life where you imagine growing old together, raising kids, and sitting on the porch in your retirement, laughing about the good times. I never thought it would all crumble in a single night. I should have seen the signs earlier. Maybe I was just too trusting. Maybe I was blind. Or maybe it's just that Emily had gotten too good at hiding the truth. You never expect the person you love to stab you in the back, and honestly, that's what makes it hurt so much. I didn't just lose a wife that night. I lost my faith in everything we had built together. It was about halfway through the party when it happened. I'd been standing in a small circle of friends, catching up with people I hadn't seen in a while, laughing about old stories, feeling good. My guard was down, like it had always been with Emily. I trusted her completely. It's funny how trust works like that. It's solid until it isn't. You don't even realize it's fragile until the moment it's shattered. One of Emily's friends, Steve, stumbled over to me. He was wasted, slurring his words, eyes half closed, clearly on his way to being blackout drunk. I didn't think much of it at first, just another guy who did too much to drink. But then he leaned in, reeking of cheap vodka, and with a drunken smirk he said it. So, man, you cool with Emily still seeing that, guys? Time seemed to freeze. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, the room spinning slightly as the words settled in my brain. At first, I thought I misheard him. I mean, what guy? Emily didn't have any guy friends she was still seeing, right? We were married. There was no way this was what it sounded like. But there was something in his tone, something in the way he said it that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I tried to keep calm, not wanting to cause a scene in the middle of the party. But inside, I was burning with anger, confusion, fear, like a storm that had suddenly hit out of nowhere. My throat felt tight, my palms sweaty as I forced myself to ask, "What guy?" I tried to sound casual, but I could feel the tremble in my voice. Steve's face turned pale as soon as he realized what he had said. His eyes went wide, and he started stammering, trying to backtrack. "Oh, man, I was just kidding, it's nothing really." He was panicking, but the damage was done. He couldn't unsay it. The way he fumbled over his words only made it worse. I knew. I just fucking knew. In that instant, everything changed. It felt like the ground beneath me opened up, and I was free falling, unable to grasp onto anything. The trust one had in her, in us, was gone in a flash, replaced by this gnawing pit in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I glanced across the room, my eyes locking on to Emily as she laughed with a group of friends, completely unaware of the bomb that had just gone off. She looked so carefree, so innocent. But now I knew better. Suddenly, the room felt too small, the air too thick. I could barely breathe. I wanted to confront her right then and there, scream at her, demand to know the truth. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I swallowed the rage and forced a smile, patting Steve on the shoulder like it was all good, like I hadn't just been punched in the gut. "Don't worry about it, man," I muttered, turning away, trying to keep my composure as my entire world began to crack. The rest of the night was a blur. I couldn't focus. Every laugh, every conversation around me felt like it was happening miles away. I watched Emily like a hawk, studying her every move, her every interaction. Was there something I missed before? Did she seem different? Was I just being paranoid now? But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, it was all a misunderstanding. That gnawing feeling wouldn't go away. Eventually, the party wound down and we headed home. The car ride was silent, tension hanging thick between us. I didn't say a word, and neither did she. I couldn't. My mind was racing, questions piling up faster than I could make sense of them. Who is this guy? How long had this been going on? Why didn't I notice? But there was one thing I knew for sure. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I wasn't going to let this slide. She needed to feel what I was feeling. The doubt, the confusion, the betrayal. She needed to understand how deeply she had destroyed not only our marriage, but her own life as well. I was going to find out everything, no matter how painful it was. That night, as Emily slept next to me, I lay wide awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind kept replaying that moment over and over again. Steve's slurred words echoing in my head. Still seeing that guy. That's when the first seeds of revenge started to take root. This wasn't going to end with me just walking away. If she thought she could betray me and get away with it, she was dead wrong. I didn't just lose my wife that night. I lost my faith in her, in us. But if she thought she could walk away from this unscathed, she had no idea what was coming. Steve's face turned pale as soon as he realized what he had said. His eyes went wide, and he started stammering, trying to backtrack. "Oh, man, I was just kidding, it's nothing really." He was panicking, but the damage was done. He couldn't unsay it. The way he fumbled over his words only made it worse. I knew. I just fucking knew. In that instant, everything changed. It felt like the ground beneath me opened up, and I was free falling, unable to grasp onto anything. The trust one had in her, in us, was gone in a flash, replaced by this gnawing pit in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I glanced across the room, my eyes locking on to Emily as she laughed with a group of friends, completely unaware of the bomb that had just gone off. She looked so carefree, so innocent. But now I knew better. Suddenly, the room felt too small, the air too thick. I could barely breathe. I wanted to confront her right then and there, scream at her, demand to know the truth. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I swallowed the rage and forced a smile, patting Steve on the shoulder like it was all good, like I hadn't just been punched in the gut. "Don't worry about it, man," I muttered, turning away, trying to keep my composure as my entire world began to crack. The rest of the night was a blur. I couldn't focus. Every laugh, every conversation around me felt like it was happening miles away. I watched Emily like a hawk, studying her every move, her every interaction. Was there something I missed before? Did she seem different? Was I just being paranoid now? But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, it was all a misunderstanding. That gnawing feeling wouldn't go away. Eventually, the party wound down and we headed home. The car ride was silent, tension hanging thick between us. I didn't say a word, and neither did she. I couldn't. My mind was racing, questions piling up faster than I could make sense of them. Who is this guy? How long had this been going on? Why didn't I notice? But there was one thing I knew for sure. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I wasn't going to let this slide. She needed to feel what I was feeling. The doubt, the confusion, the betrayal. She needed to understand how deeply she had destroyed not only our marriage, but her own life as well. I was going to find out everything, no matter how painful it was. That night, as Emily slept next to me, I lay wide awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind kept replaying that moment over and over again. Steve's slurred words echoing in my head. Still seeing that guy. I couldn't get past it. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could picture was Emily with someone else, laughing, touching, kissing. It made me sick to my stomach. I had to know. There was no way I could just leave it hanging there. So, I did what I never thought I'd do in a million years. I grabbed her phone. She always kept it on the nightstand next to her side of the bed. I knew her password. Hell, She'd never given me a reason not to trust her before. That's what made this so damn surreal. I unlocked it easily and started scrolling through her messages. My hands were shaking, and my heart was pounding so loud I thought it'd wake her. At first, everything seemed normal. Messages from her friends, work stuff. But then I found it. His name was Jake, and the moment I opened their chat, everything inside me twisted. There were messages that seemed innocent at first, jokes, casual conversation, but as I scrolled further, it became obvious. There were flirty texts, subtle at first, and then not so subtle. He was telling her how beautiful she was, how much he missed her, how he couldn't wait to see her again. And then there were the photos. She had sent him pictures, selfies, some of them in outfits I recognized, some in things I'd never seen her wear. I felt my face heat up with rage. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The woman I had loved, trusted, and built a life with was living a double life. I wanted to throw her phone across the room, wake her up, scream at her, demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I just sat there, seething, my blood boiling. The betrayal was so thick I could taste it. I put her phone back, careful not to wake her, and got out of bed. There was no way I could lie next to her another second. I spent the rest of the night in the living room, just staring at the wall. I felt numb and alive all at once. It was like the ground had shifted beneath me, and everything I thought I knew was a lie. But now that I knew the truth, the real question was, what was I going to do about it? I couldn't confront her yet. Not like this. I needed to think, to plan. If she thought she could cheat on me and walk away without consequences, she had no idea who she was dealing with. She'd broken us, and now she was going to pay for it. The next few days were hell. I pretended like everything was normal, but inside I was seething. Every time Emily smiled at me, kissed me goodbye, or asked how my day was, it felt like she was twisting a knife deeper into my chest. I played my part, though, kept up the act, laughed at her jokes, went through the motions like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I just couldn't let her see it. Not yet. I started gathering more proof. Her phone was easy enough. Whenever she left the room, I'd sneak a look, making sure I screenshotted and saved everything I needed. The texts with Jake kept coming. Sometimes they were short and casual. Other times they were longer, more intimate. But what really killed me was how normal it all seemed for her. She was living two lives, and I was just a background character in one of them. One evening we were sitting on the couch watching TV. She was curled up next to me, head resting on my shoulder like she always did. Anyone looking from the outside would have thought we were just a normal, happy couple. But all I could think about was her with him. Was she thinking of Jake right now? Did she smile like this when she was with him? I had to swallow down the bile, rising in my throat. "Everything okay?" she asked, looking up at me with those big eyes of hers. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired from work." She smiled softly and snuggled closer, completely oblivious. The rage simmered inside me, but I kept it in check. I had to. This wasn't the time to explode. Not yet. I needed her to stay comfortable, to think everything was fine, because while she was busy living in her fantasy world, I was busy planning hers to come crashing down. I started laying the groundwork for what was to come. It wasn't enough just to catch her in the act. I wanted her to feel every ounce of pain she had put me through. I wanted her to understand that betrayal like this doesn't come without consequences. And I wanted to do it slowly, methodically, a scavenger hunt of sorts, one that would lead her step by step toward her own destruction. I began planting little seeds of doubt, casual comments here and there, nothing too obvious, but enough to get under her skin. I'd bring up old memories from our past, hinting at things that didn't sit right with me anymore. "Remember that weekend you said you were visiting your sister? I was thinking about that the other day. Weird how I never saw any photos from the trip. Or, I've been getting this strange feeling lately, like something's off. Have you noticed anything?" At first, she brushed it off, smiling like everything was fine. But I could see it. the tiny flicker of panic in her eyes whenever I dropped one of those little bombs. She didn't know I already knew. She was still playing her game, and I was quietly setting the stage for the grand finale. The first few weeks of this were tough, pretending like everything was normal while plotting my revenge. But every time I felt that burning anger bubbling up, I reminded myself of the end game. I was going to make sure she felt every bit of the betrayal I felt. And when she did, it wouldn't be sudden. It would be slow, drawn out. Just like the way she destroyed us, piece by piece, without me even realizing it. But now I was in control, and she had no idea. With every passing day, I got better at hiding my anger, at keeping up the charade. Emily had no clue what was coming, and that gave me a twisted sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just about catching her anymore. It was about making her feel the slow burn of dread that had consumed me since that night at the party. I started small, little things she wouldn't immediately notice, but would make her question if something was off. It began with her morning routine. Emily was a type who relied on structure. Same time for breakfast, same spot for her keys, same mug for coffee. So I messed with the details, just enough to mess with her head. One morning, her keys weren't in the bowl by the door where she always left them. I'd hidden them under a pile of mail, watching her panic as she searched the house. She looked frazzled, confused. "Babe, did you see my keys?" she asked, her voice tight with frustration. I shrugged, playing dumb. "Nope. Maybe you left them in your purse." She dug through her bag, muttering under her breath, only to find them buried in the mail pile later. She laughed it off, but I saw the flicker of doubt cross her face. One small seed planted. Next, I began leaving little notes around the house. At first, they seemed innocent enough. Post-its with things like, "I love you" or "thinking of you today." Just sweet, normal husband stuff. She found them cute, and I could see how much she enjoyed these tiny surprises. That made it even better because I knew where it was all headed. A week later, the tone of the notes started to change. Instead of love notes, I left ones that hinted at my growing suspicion, but still subtle enough to keep her guessing. "We've been through so much together, haven't we? Can't believe how long it's been." Stuff that would seem harmless on the surface, but could easily make her start questioning if I was thinking about something deeper. And then came the next phase, the personal, nostalgic ones. I started reminding her of specific moments from our past, the memories that had meant something to us both. "Remember our trip to the cabin? Best weekend ever." Or, "I still think about our first date sometimes. Felt like the start of forever." The kind of memories she couldn't ignore, the ones that would stir up emotions and guilt. She found a note like that one night, tucked into her makeup bag. I watched from the doorway as she unfolded it, her face softening for a second as she read it. But then I saw her expression change. Something uneasy flickered across her face. She looked up at me, trying to gauge what I meant by it. "This is sweet," she said, but there was a hesitancy in her voice. I could tell she wasn't sure how to respond. "I just thought about it today," I said, keeping my tone casual. "It was a good memory, don't you think?" "Yeah," she replied, nodding. "It was." But I saw the gears turning in her head. She didn't trust the note. She didn't trust me. Good. That was the point. By now, the game was fully in motion. I was in control, and Emily had no idea that each step she took was leading her closer to the truth I already knew. The notes continued, each one pulling her deeper into the web I was weaving. I could see her start to get uneasy, like she was walking on eggshells, unsure of whether she should be concerned or if she was just overthinking things. But she wasn't overthinking. She was right to be nervous. The last note I left that week was different from the others. It was just one word. Soon. I stuck it in her purse, knowing she'd find it on her way to work. When she did, I got a text from her later that morning, just a simple, "What's that note about?" I didn't respond. I let her sit with it, let her mind race with questions, because that was exactly where I wanted her, unsure, anxious, and on edge. The game had officially begun. Emily's confusion started to show more and more after that last note. She wasn't the carefree woman she had been just a few weeks ago. I could see it in the way she looked at me now. There was a flicker of worry behind her eyes, a tension in her smile. She was beginning to realize something was off, and that's exactly what I wanted. I kept the pressure on, though. It wasn't enough to just make her doubt. She had to feel the walls closing in slowly, suffocating her with guilt and fear. The notes kept coming, each one more cryptic than the last. I switched it up, no longer sticking to sweet memories or love notes. Now they were just vague little reminders that something wasn't right. Things like, "I've been thinking a lot lately," or "Do you ever wonder what people hide from us?" I watched her find one of these notes on a random Tuesday. She was going through her purse, pulling out receipts and loose change, and there it was, folded in half, waiting for her. I could see her stiffen when she opened it, her eyes darting across the words. She stood there for a moment completely still, and then quietly slipped it back into her purse. She didn't mention it to me. She was starting to keep things to herself, starting to withdraw, and that was part of the plan. It was around this time that I began dropping little hints in our conversations, small enough to fly under the radar, but loaded enough to hit her where it hurt. We'd be sitting at the dinner table, eating in silence, when I'd suddenly ask, "Do you ever think about trust? Like how important it is, you know?" She'd glance up at me, fork halfway to her mouth, her eyes widening just a bit. Yeah, of course," she'd say, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the strain in her voice. I'd nod and continue, like I was just making conversation. "Yeah, it's funny how you can think you know someone inside and out, but sometimes, I don't know, people can really surprise you." That one always landed hard. She'd shift in her seat, suddenly interested in her food again, but I could see the effect it was having on her. Her guard was slipping. Then came the nights when I'd deliberately come home late. No explanation, no excuse. I'd just walk in, hours past my usual time, and head straight for the shower or the couch without saying a word. She'd ask where I'd been, and I'd just shrug, avoiding her eyes. "Work ran late," I'd mutter. "Nothing big." She didn't believe me. I could tell. And I made sure to stay just vague enough to keep her guessing, let her mind wander down all the wrong paths. The final touch was her phone. I started leaving little signs that I had access to it. Opening apps she rarely used, moving things around just slightly. Once, I sent a text to myself from her phone while she was in the shower, then deleted the message, so only the notification stayed on her screen. When she picked it up, she was confused. I watched her swipe through her messages, seeing nothing out of place, but the look on her face was priceless. "Did you get a message from me earlier?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "Nah," I said, barely looking up from the TV. Must have been a glitch or something. She didn't push it, but I could see how rattled she was. I was getting under her skin, just like she had gotten under mine. Each little move was another brick in the wall, trapping her in the prison of her own guilt. I didn't need to scream, or accuse, or throw a fit. I was playing the long game, letting her destroy herself from the inside out. She was starting to panic, and that's exactly where I needed her to be. Soon, she wouldn't be able to ignore it anymore. Soon, she'd realize there was no escape from the truth. And then, I'd make my move. The time had come. I'd been patient, letting the tension build, watching as Emily unraveled bit by bit. Her carefree demeanor was gone, replaced by this constant edge, like she was walking on broken glass. Every glance she threw my way was filled with doubt, like she was trying to figure out if I knew. I did. I could tell she was on the verge of breaking, and that's when I decided it was time to push things further. I wanted to set the trap in motion, to start her down the path of no return. So, I crafted the perfect final step in my game, a scavenger hunt of sorts, but not the kind she'd ever expect. I left the first note in her makeup drawer, knowing she'd find it that morning while getting ready for work. It was simple. Meet me where we first kissed. 7 p.m. Alone. It was enough to throw her completely off balance. That spot, where we'd shared our first kiss years ago, was sentimental to us, a place that held memories of a time when things were good, pure even. I knew she'd recognize the location right away, and more importantly, I knew the confusion and dread it would stir up in her. That evening, I acted normal, like nothing was happening, while she fumbled through her usual routine, obviously rattled by the note. She was quieter than usual, her eyes darting to me every now and then, but she didn't ask about it. She was too scared, too unsure. At 6:45, she told me she had to run an errand, something about meeting up with a friend. I just nodded, playing along, keeping my eyes on the TV. "Okay, see you later," I said casually, not even turning to look at her. She lingered for a second, probably expecting more of a reaction, but I didn't give her one. Finally, she left, her heels clicking on the floor as she walked out the door. I followed her, of course. Not right away, but just enough behind so she wouldn't notice me. When I got to the spot, the park where we'd shared that first kiss, I watched from a distance as she stood there, looking lost, scanning the area. The note had worked. She was here, just like I planned. After a few minutes of pacing nervously, she pulled out her phone and started typing. No doubt, she was texting Jake, asking what the hell was going on. I knew he wouldn't respond, he couldn't. I had made sure of that. The messages I'd sent from her phone had already put a stop to that. I let her stew in that confusion for a good while, just standing there, lost and alone. She had no idea she was the star of this show, a pawn in the game I was directing. Then came the second note. I had taped it to her car window while she was standing in the park, oblivious to me slipping through the shadows. I watched from behind a tree as she finally noticed it, walking back to her car and peeling it off the windshield. This one was a little less cryptic. "You're getting close. Look under your seat." She hesitated, looking around like she half expected someone to jump out at her. But no one came, of course. This was her game to play. I watched as she leaned into her car, rummaging under the driver's seat, and pulled out the next clue, a small envelope. Inside were photos. Photos of her and Jake, the ones I had taken from her phone weeks ago. There were no explicit images, but they didn't need to be. It was enough to show her that I knew everything. Her reaction was immediate. She froze, staring at the pictures like the world had just dropped out from beneath her. I could see her breathing quicken, her fingers trembling as she clutched the photos, panic written all over her face. She knew. Finally, she knew. I stepped out from behind the tree, walking slowly toward her, making sure my footsteps were heavy enough for her to hear. She whipped around, her face pale as a ghost, eyes wide with terror. "Jacob," she whispered, her voice shaking. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her, letting the silence stretch between us, letting her feel the weight of everything she had done. The betrayal, the lies, the double life she thought she could hide. I could see it all in her eyes, the fear, the regret, the guilt. She was crumbling, and I hadn't even said anything yet. "Why? Why are you doing this?" she stammered, clutching the photos to her chest like they were some kind of shield. I stepped closer, slowly, deliberately, until I was just inches from her. I could feel the power shift in that moment. She was no longer in control. I was. "Because, Emily," I said, my voice low and calm, "you destroyed everything." I could see the tears welling up in her eyes, her lips trembling as she tried to find something to say, some excuse, some way to justify what she had done. But there was nothing. She was trapped, and she knew it. The game wasn't over yet, though. This was just the beginning. Emily stood there, frozen, clutching those photos like they could somehow protect her from the truth staring her in the face. Her breathing was shallow, tears welling up, and I could see her mind racing, trying to piece together what was happening. But she knew. Deep down, she knew she had been caught. I didn't give her much time to react. I wasn't in the mood for some emotional outburst, some excuse she was probably scrambling to come up with. Instead, I kept my voice calm, controlled, like I was talking about something as mundane as the weather. "How long?" I asked, my eyes locked on hers. "How long have you been sneaking around behind my back?" She looked down, unable to meet my gaze, her lips trembling as she tried to speak. "Jacob, it's not what you think," she whispered, her voice shaky. I couldn't help but laugh, a bitter, humorless sound. "Not what I think. Really? You sure about that? Because these." I gestured to the photos she was holding. They looked pretty damn clear to me. She finally looked up, tears now streaming down her face. "I made a mistake," she stammered. "I never wanted to hurt you. I don't know why I did it. I was confused." "Confused?" I spat, my anger bubbling up despite my efforts to stay calm. "Confused doesn't make you send photos to another guy. Confused doesn't make you sneak around for months, lying to my face every single day." She flinched at my words, her whole body shaking now. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far." I stepped closer, so close that she had to back up against her car. "Didn't mean for it to go this far? How far did you mean for it to go, Emily? A couple of flirty texts? A few secret meetups? Or were you planning to leave me for him?" "No," she cried, shaking her head violently. "I wasn't going to leave you. I swear, Jacob, I wasn't. It was just a stupid mistake. Please, you have to believe me." Believe her? The nerve. After all the lies, after all the secrets she had kept, she actually thought she could plead her way out of this. "You want me to believe you?" I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "After everything you've done? After all the nights you left me alone, wondering where you were? You want me to believe that you weren't going to leave me? That this was just a mistake?" She couldn't answer. She just stood there, sobbing, her hands shaking so bad she dropped the photos. They scattered across the ground, but neither of us made a move to pick them up. I stared at her, waiting for something, anything, that would make sense, some explanation that could justify how she had thrown our life away. But there was nothing, just tears and hollow apologies. "I trusted you," I said, my voice low but filled with all the hurt and rage I'd been holding back. "I built my whole life around us, around this marriage, and you fucking destroyed it. For what? For some guy who doesn't give a damn about you." Her sobs grew louder, and she tried to reach out, her hand trembling as she placed it on my arm. "Jacob, please, we can fix this. I'll do anything. Just, please don't leave me." I yanked my arm away, disgusted by her touch. "You already left me, Emily. The moment you decided to go behind my back, you left me. There's nothing to fix." Her knees buckled, and she slid down the side of the car, crumpling onto the ground, her sobs echoing in the empty park. I should have felt something, pity, maybe even a sliver of regret, but I didn't. All I felt was cold, detached. This was her doing, her choice. And now she was facing the consequences. "You think Jake's going to take you in now?" I asked, looking down at her pathetic figure on the ground. "Think he's going to want you after this?" She didn't respond, just buried her face in her hands, her whole body shaking as she cried. I almost laughed at how pathetic it all was. The fantasy she had built up in her mind was crumbling, and now reality was crashing down on her. I crouched down beside her, forcing her to look at me. "He doesn't care about you, Emily. He never did. He's already gone. I made sure of that." Her tear-streaked face looked up at me, confused. What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I smiled, a cruel, satisfied smile. "You'll find out soon enough." I stood up, leaving her there in a mess of tears and guilt. This was only the beginning. I had been planning every step, every move, and now the real fun was about to start. She wasn't going to get away with this. Not by a long shot. As I walked away, I didn't look back. The trap was set, and Emily had walked right into it. Now, it was time for the final act. The satisfaction of watching Emily crumble in that park fueled me for what came next. Her tears, her desperate apologies. None of it mattered. She destroyed our life, our marriage, and now it was her turn to feel the weight of it all. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted her to feel the same hopelessness, The same sense of loss that had consumed me since the night I learned the truth. The next day, I made my move. I filed the divorce papers. Emily didn't know this yet, of course. She was still reeling from the night before, walking around the house like a ghost, eyes swollen from crying, barely able to look at me. I watched her from across the room, coldly detached, no sympathy left for the woman I used to love. She was a stranger now, and I was about to make sure her world came crashing down. I planned the reveal carefully. When I got home from work, I acted like everything was normal. I made small talk during dinner, kept my tone casual, and even asked about her day, watching her try to piece together what was happening. She was on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop, and that's exactly where I wanted her. After dinner, I excused myself to the living room, grabbing a beer and settling in like it was any other night. Emily hovered nearby, unsure of what to do, her anxiety practically radiating off her. She was waiting for something, anything, but I wasn't going to give her what she expected. Not yet. She sat down next to me on the couch, her hands fidgeting nervously. "Jacob," she began, her voice shaky, "we need to talk." I didn't respond right away, just took a sip of my beer and kept my eyes on the TV. "About what?" I asked casually, like I didn't already know. She hesitated, then continued. "About last night, about everything. I need to explain." I cut her off, finally turning to face her, my expression hard. "No, Emily, you don't need to explain anything. I know exactly what you did. The only thing left is for you to face the consequences." Her face paled, and she bit her lip, trying to hold back more tears. "Please, Jacob, I know I messed up, but I'm begging you. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't leave me." I leaned forward, my gaze locking onto hers. "It's already done." She blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope, the divorce papers. I handed them to her, watching as she stared at them like they were a bomb about to go off. Her hands trembled as she opened it, her eyes scanning the pages in disbelief. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, please, Jacob. You can't do this. We can fix this. We can work through it." I stood up, towering over her, my voice cold and final. "You broke us, Emily. You shattered everything we had, and now you want to patch it up like nothing happened? You think we can just go back to the way things were?" I scoffed. "It's too late for that." She looked up at me, desperation in her eyes. "But I love you. I do. Please, don't throw this away." I stared at her, feeling nothing but emptiness. "You already did." The silence hung heavy between us, and for a moment, I thought she might fight harder, plead more. But instead, she just sat there, her shoulders slumping as the weight of reality sank in. The papers fell from her lap onto the floor, her tears returning. But this time, there were no words, no excuses. She knew it was over. I left her there, broken and sobbing, while I went upstairs to pack a bag. I couldn't stand to be in the same house with her anymore, not after everything. I had already planned to stay with a friend for a few days, just long enough for the process to start moving. Before I left, I paused at the door, looking back at her one last time. "The lawyers will be in touch," I said coldly. "I'll come back for the rest of my stuff later." She didn't respond, just sat there on the couch, staring blankly ahead, her entire world unraveling in front of her. She looked so small, so defeated, but there was no sympathy left in me. Not anymore. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. The weight of her lies, her betrayal. It was finally lifting off my shoulders. The trap had been sprung, and Emily was now left to deal with the wreckage of her choices. But the fallout was only just beginning. What she didn't know was that the life she had tried so hard to hide was about to come crashing down on her in ways she couldn't even imagine. I had made sure of it. Jake was gone. Her friends would soon know the truth. And as for her reputation, well, that was already crumbling. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about making sure she felt the full consequences of her betrayal. Leaving the house that night should have felt like closure, like I was finally walking away from the mess Emily had made. But as I drove to my buddy Dave's place, I realized it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The divorce papers were just the start. I wanted her to feel the collapse of everything she had built. Just like I had felt my life crumble the night I found out about her affair. And that's exactly what was coming next. The first domino was Jake. I'd made sure he was out of the picture long before Emily even realized something was wrong. After I found the texts and the photos on her phone, I did more than just screenshot them. I went deeper, finding Jake's number and reaching out to him, posing as Emily. I played the part well, teasing him, suggesting we meet somewhere discreet, only for him to show up and find no one there. I didn't think it would end like this, she whimpered, tears streaming down her face. Well, it has, I said, my voice cold as ice. This is your reality now. You destroyed your life, and there's no going back. No fixing it. She collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands, her sobs echoing through the room. I watched her for a moment, feeling nothing but emptiness. There was no satisfaction in this, no sense of triumph, just the cold, hard truth that everything had been lost. When I finished packing, I slung the bag over my shoulder and turned to leave. But as I reached the doorway, I paused, looking back at her one last time. I hope it was worth it, I said quietly, before walking out. That was the last time I saw her in person. The divorce went through quickly, without much of a fight. Emily didn't have it in her to argue or push back. She signed the papers without question, like she knew there was no point. Her life was in ruins, and there was nothing left for her to hold on to. From what I heard through the grapevine, things only got worse for her after that. Word about her affair spread like wildfire, and whatever reputation she had left was completely obliterated. Her boss eventually let her go, citing personal issues as the reason. She tried to find work elsewhere, but the whispers followed her. No one wanted to hire someone with her baggage. She moved out of the house a few months after the divorce was finalized. I don't know where she went, but it wasn't anywhere close by. One of our mutual friends mentioned that she had downsized to a tiny apartment on the other side of town, living alone, trying to start over. Her friends, most of them were gone. A few stayed in touch with her out of pity, but they kept their distance. No one wanted to be associated with her mess. She was a girl who had it all and threw it away for some fling, and no one was going to forget that anytime soon. Jake, he vanished from her life completely. After I sent those texts to his girlfriend and wrecked his own relationship, he had no reason to stick around. He cut all ties with Emily, left her to deal with the fallout on her own. I don't know where he is now, and frankly, I don't care. I moved on. I took my time, healed, rebuilt my life piece by piece. It wasn't easy, and there were days where the anger still simmered beneath the surface. But I wasn't the same broken man I had been when I first found out. I was stronger now, sharper, and most importantly, I had my freedom. As for Emily, well, every now and then, I hear about her through old friends. She's still alone, still trying to pick up the pieces of her life. The woman who once had everything now had nothing. No love, no respect, no future. And in the end, that's exactly what she deserved.
And thanks for watching.